Mindbend. Non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for Mindbend Creative.
Zipporah, thank you so much for joining me on the Mindbend podcast today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Where are you coming from today? You're visiting Los Angeles from Baja, is that right?
I'm currently staying in Baja, just outside of Rosarito.
Cool. We met at the Awakening of Consciousness conference a couple of weeks ago here in Los Angeles, very briefly, but that informed a meeting that followed afterwards, which was a Tantric Breathwork, Cannabis-infused Tantric Breathwork workshop, ceremony that happened in a beautiful home here in LA. And I was really struck by the container that you created and the reverence that you held for the ceremony and the way that you disarmed the participants, myself included, who can be nervous going into something new and different. And so that must be important to you to create containers that work for people.
Yeah, I mean, especially when I was under time pressure, it wasn't something that I had a lot of time in order to be able to create that.
Yeah.
But I still managed to do it. And so, yeah, it's really important, especially, when it comes to closing down the eyes, the physical eyes, and you're in a room full of people. Some people can get paranoid even with just that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Think about that alone. Like it's just, strangers and people that you don't know. So, do you hold events in person like that I got to go to regularly?
Yeah. I either do it in a workshop setting or ceremony, but for me, they're both ceremonies, but usually much longer containers. And so there's enough time to talk about intentions, to go around the room, get to know each other a bit, talk about why we're there and what kind of relationship we have with cannabis, and maybe what our intentions are when it comes to connecting with our bodies and whatever it is whatever goals we have in our life that we want to be able to achieve by using the power of our senses, including our sixth sense. When we're in that state of higher consciousness, we're able to see the visions of it a lot more clear and have it it's more believable when you're in that space. When you can see it through. And most people, when they connect with cannabis, they can see like third eye visions. They're able to paint, as what they call it in ayahuasca. People paint more with cannabis, especially the ones that perhaps don't have third eye visions with ayahuasca. They try a cannabis ceremony and then they see that they're able to have that clear picture, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you consider cannabis to be psychedelic?
Yes.
Yeah. And what does that mean to you?
It's altering your consciousness in a very intentional way and setting the space for it, for you, the person, to go really deep and explore whatever needs to be shown. And so, yes, there's different plant medicines that you can do that with. And, cannabis is a master plan. And so I teach people how to reach those psychedelic states with combining cannabis and breathwork and intentionality.
It's the combination of the breath work with the cannabis.
I would say so, but you can also get there by taking a lot of edibles and then get there by accident, which isn't always pleasant.
Yeah.
Because it can catch you at a time where you're not prepared.
How did you come to this work?
So I had gone 15 years without touching cannabis. There was a point in my life where I thought I was allergic to it because one time I was smoking it, and I was smoking with some friends in the middle of the winter. This is back in Philadelphia. And all of a sudden I felt the whole panic attack symptoms happening with the speeding heart race. And then I almost felt like I had a lump in my throat and I couldn't breathe. And so I passed out. Eventually I got taken to the ER, and I was there for about 6 hours, hooked up with an IV with oxygen up my nose. And And they told me that maybe the cannabis was laced. This is when I was 19. It was a long time ago. And so I am very stubborn, and I didn't want to think that the cannabis was laced, but I decided, you know what, I'm going to try a different batch, and I'm going to put it in brownies. And at the time, I didn't realize that was going to create a more potent effect. And so the same thing happened. And at the time, I never experienced a panic attack or these anxiety attacks before. In hindsight, it happened because a little bit before that, in that same year, I had experienced a really serious trauma. And I didn't get help for it. I kept it all inside. And so when I went to go smoke the plant, it triggered and manifested into a physical panic attack. So that's why it's important for people that maybe have like a shock nervous system, they're in fight or flight or freeze. It's not a good time to do these psychedelic journeys, because your body is just not in the right state to be experiencing those levels of. And at the time, cannabis is, I'm going to say it's my plant. I've tried a lot of plant medicines. Cannabis is my plant, but at the time, it wasn't mine. It wasn't for me, because I had a lot of healing to do. And the power of the medicine was just showing me, hey, like, you need to tend to yourself. You need to figure out like what you need to do in order to release all these emotions and the wounds and the trauma. And like I said, it took me a long time to realize that, but I did go on the spiritual healing path. And so, yeah, I started exploring different healing modalities. And I looked into meditation, into breathwork, being able to calm your nervous system through just breathing and slow down your heart rate through breath, doing Wim Hof method. And 15 years later, I decided that I was ready to face death. And I say face death and try cannabis again.
After the two bad experiences.
Yeah, for 15 years, I was ready to do it again, because I felt confident in my ability to calm myself down on my own. And I had somebody with me who knew CPR. So for me, that was enough. And so I got back into experimenting with it. And I started noticing that, yes, the anxiety symptoms were coming up, but I was reminding myself that, hey, like, you're able to breathe up your nose. We're getting oxygen into your brain. Everything's okay. Just calming myself down that way. And then it's almost like I passed this invisible line, and then I would go into these DMT realms where it felt like an ayahuasca journey. And I would just have to go lay down and close my eyes and get comfortable under the covers and put on some high vibe music, medicine music, and lay there for hours. And so I started practicing this over and over again. It started out doing it every Sunday, like going to church. And I would ask my friends, do you ever experience this with weed? And they would say no. And so I just thought it was interesting. And back then I didn't think to call it psychedelic back then, but I mean, that's what it was. And then I started experimenting and taking my friends into those realms, and it was working each and every time. And then that's when I realized, okay. And I was already holding space for a women's circle that I had created in Playa del Carmen. We were meeting every Wednesday on a beach, and I would facilitate rapé, which is a tobacco shamanic snuff, in order to start the circle and get everybody nice and open and vulnerable to share what they want to share for that week. And little did I know that circle right there was also training for me to do co-ed circles. And so, yeah, I mean, cannabis for me, I was treating I didn't have a shaman back then for cannabis. And so Mary Jane was my shaman, and I would learn through her and through my intuition, because that's another thing that you get access to is more of the third eye chakra, the door to infinite space of wisdom and just being connected in that way, and with Mother Nature and the divine feminine. And so thanks to her, I feel like I was able to find my voice. It showed me that, I'm a tantric, and it helped me come out of the tantric closet, if you will, with people and take it more seriously and more professionally, get training for it. And I knew I wanted to devote a whole cannabis ceremony around Tantra and intimacy and teaching people about that and Shakti energy. And so then that happened. And anyway, I'll stop right there.
Yeah, there's a number of sections I want to delve into a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
The first question is, between the time that you had, because the cannabis experiences that were not enjoyable or that put you in the hospital, and then also just were unpleasant, they were just recreational experiences,
Yes.
right? There was no like ceremonial
Not at
intentionality
all.
behind that, right? Okay, so then it was 15 years later that so what happened in the interim in your life that sort of influenced you to move back into like looking at, I'm going to inch back into seeing what this relationship has? It was just a curiosity to revisit it. What informed, like what went on in your life to inform like that revisitation, if you would please?
I had moved to Silicon Valley, and I was working there for 5 years, working in tech startups. And I would say on year 4, I realized that there was more for me that I needed to discover, and it was pulling me abroad. And ultimately, I chose Colombia because that's where both of my parents are from. And I was born in New York, but they met in New York and then had me over there. And so I never had that experience of living there. And so people are like, oh, you went back to Colombia. Well, for me, it's going for the first time to really discover and understand the culture, the people, my roots, and just go deep with the ancestral medicines because it's way more accessible there. And you would think that, it's part of the culture to do ayahuasca and yopo and all these other plant medicines, but no. The people there are just as unconscious as a lot of people in many different societies. And so,
is there policy to indicate that in Colombia? I have no idea what the regulations are regarding like ayahuasca specifically in Colombia.
well, there's a scare. I don't know what the policies are either, but there is a scare and a lot of negative conversation around it because, well, just like in any type of field, there's always going to be the people that take abuse their power and will do wrong things during an ayahuasca ceremony with, like a male shaman with a female. And so there's talk about that, and then that scares people even more. But that can happen with anything, and with a bad, that's why people really need to do their research and get a really good referral when doing these medicines in a jungle. But so there's that. I think there's been just a few deaths from it, and so that has created hysteria with a lot of people. But yeah, it's right in the backyard, and most people they're just afraid to touch it.
You were working in Silicon Valley for 5 years, and then you felt like it was time to take this trip to Colombia. And while you were there, before you went, did you decide that you were going to try to investigate some plant medicine modalities? You did. Okay.
Yeah.
What informed that interest prior to going?
I had been dabbling in the shamanic, let's say, ceremonies when I was in San Francisco, and I did ayahuasca. I did take ayahuasca.
That was the first
for
time
the first time
in San Francisco.
in Humboldt County, and then after that it was in Medellin, Colombia, in the mountains. And over there, ayahuasca, we call it yahe. It's actually the masculine version of ayahuasca, which is the grandmother. And so we would do yahe, and I was part of a Colombian healing community where, like, you barely ever see any tourist or travel. Well, some travelers, yes, but it was just mostly locals, and they would invite shamans from Putumayo in the Amazon, and over there it's very like makeshift. The ceremony is on top of a mountain in the middle of the night on the floor with your sleeping bag or whatever you brought. So it's not luxury or anything at all, and it always seems to rain. So
Something you knew about though before you went? Is this a community that you knew you were going to fall in with?
No, I discovered it over there, but I knew I would discover it over there. I found it being in the conscious community.
So that experience, and how long did that go on for, the Colombia experience?
About 4 years before I started traveling more.
You were there for 4 years? Oh, so you were in Colombia for 4 years. So you left the Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I left in 2018, and I still have my apartment over there. And then I would say in 2021, or during the pandemic, that's when I really started kind of leaving and going, being more nomadic. And then living in Playa for 3 years on and off. The Riviera Maya.
Okay. Okay, amazing. So what do you think it was? Because you said you had an interest in being a shaman or shamanism or
Shamanism.
Shamanism, yeah. Okay. So what did you identify as your role in that world?
I didn't know. I didn't know, but it was pulling me, and it felt very indigenous and like something that I really wanted to explore. And it wasn't until I got to Medellin. I have he's a physician, but he's also an energy doctor, and he got his license in Chinese medicine. And so he does Reiki. Like when I go for my session with him, he does Reiki, and he can also tell you what your gifts are, if you believe in that. And one of the gifts that he told me was that, well, he said, 1, you're a salesperson. 2, you're good at helping people, like counseling or therapy. 3, those don't really matter to you. What your soul really wants to do is serve. And so you're a healer. And at that moment, I just started tearing up. And so that's, and this is before I knew I was a healer. And so my soul knew it, and he knew it. And a lot of things started making sense. And I think I had been, one of the reasons why I also went there was to discover my higher calling. But back then I didn't know that terminology. I wasn't looking for, how to connect with my highest self. I didn't know any of that lingo. I was just looking for a way to, like, as an entrepreneur, to find my niche in business, whatever that is. And it ended up being in this world, in the healing arts. And so it took a lot of experimenting with different plant medicines and doing my own ceremonies to find my way to working with cannabis and Tantra.
Yeah, we haven't even really touched Tantra yet. So maybe this is a good point to segue into that component of your practice and your identity and your entrepreneurship. Speak to Tantra and why Tantra speaks to you.
Yeah. So I used to, I lost my virginity at a young age, and it was a planned encounter with a next door neighbor. And, I feel like even with that, it's just getting on the wrong foot of something so sacred. And I think over time, it's almost like I developed a way of detaching from the experiences just to get the satisfaction.
Detaching from the
from the emotional side of things.
Okay. So the way the first experience came about, you were tapping into the energetic nature of it, but you were doing it in a way that was not at all like aligned with what you would later find out.
Yeah, it wasn't
possible.
out of love.
Yeah.
It wasn't out of having deep connection with somebody. It was for the sake of trying it, and so I went through life being very promiscuous and being very leaky with my sexual energy. And so I hit a point where I just realized, like, no, this is not working. You know, I am looking for a partner, but I feel like I'm also looking for intimacy in all the wrong ways. You know, I was under the impression that intimacy was sex. And so what Tantra helped me to realize is that the body is a temple. It's sacred. We have to be very careful who we let in, because there's, you know, the energy transference is a very real thing. We can take on all types of baggage, whether it's energetic, physical, STDs, STIs, viruses, or even mental. Like if a person's going through depression or any type of mental disorder, we can take that on and then start to become that ourselves, and vice versa. And so it was actually cannabis. When I started working with the plant, I lost the desire of swiping, of going on the apps. I felt like my sexual energy just kind of closed in, and just I was reserving it in a way that I hadn't before.
Directly influenced by the cannabis.
By the cannabis ceremonies that I was doing, and the work that I had been practicing with it. And, you know, I was cultivating the sexual energy through the breath work, through the movement, sound. But then I was using it for manifestation. So now we're talking about sex magic and sexual transmutation. And so I got on a path of conscious celibacy after that. And I started reserving my intimacy with, you know, somebody that I could see. Well, we have to have the conversation if there's any alignment there, but that's usually, you know, how I determine if I'm a lot more slower with everything, even kissing. When you think about it, kissing is extremely intimate.
Yeah.
And we're just giving it away like nothing sometimes. And so, yeah, it's almost like going back and relearning what sacred sexuality really is supposed to be about. Not this whole, you know, the silent epidemic of casual sex and just connecting with each other and using each other for pleasure and not really getting completely satisfied at the same time because the lack of proper sex education and how to actually touch a woman.
Well, Tantra it's connected to Hinduism?
Yes.
And it is it's an extension of Hinduism for how to consider the body and what the body can create possible. How would you describe Tantra and its origin?
Yeah, you're always going to get a different answer every time you talk or ask somebody about this. But it's a way of living more intentionally, treating everything as a ritual, especially intimacy, especially lovemaking as a worship.
Tantra is a way of living and seeing things as ritual. Mm-hmm. So maybe something that we take for granted, but having a new reverence for it, because reverence is sort of innate to a ritual. Is that, and is that just like a kind of like intentional examination of a moment or a series of moments? Or can you describe some other rituals apart from the sexual component in Tantra?
It could be, so we call making coffee and drinking it a ritual. Everything that you do in the morning, if you want to work out, if you're eating food, like stopping. So to answer your question, it's about having full presence and awareness and really being in the moment and enjoying it.
That's a tantric practice.
Yeah. So it's about getting out of the mind and just connecting and just being. Connecting to your body and just being. And so, you know, using the tantric elements, breath, sound, breathing is something that we do, but we don't ever think about. And so conscious breathing is going to get us to really breathe deeply into the diaphragm. And most of us don't. And that's why we go into the fight or flight, because we're taking shallow breaths and then we're not really breathing all the way down into our bellies.
Can I take a breath with you right now?
Sure.
A deep breath down into the belly? Mm-hmm. How often do you take a breath like this?
So you could do it, you know, in the morning before bed. incorporating breath work, like with music. Like for me, everything that I do includes high frequencies and very intentional music on getting us there. And well, it depends on the tempo, on how the breath work's going to be. But I already. So taking a breath in through your nose and letting it all out with a sigh. And then if you wanted to find a rhythm and you know, on whatever track that you have, you can breathe with the music. Or you could play breathwork on an app. You can find it on YouTube. There's so many different ways of breathing, of making it fun and inviting others to do it with you. I like to say that breathwork is a new happy hour, because I honestly just love when people come over, I come over their place, light up Mary and connect and then go into it. And even with like just 5-10 minutes, it'll really reset you.
One piece of your story that I'm still not, I don't feel like I understand. If the relationship with cannabis was not, or was challenging in a way that didn't feel comfortable, what really made it be so that I know that the Tantra, the consideration, the breath work is part of being grounded, being embodied, but was that utilized to mitigate the effect of the cannabis, or the cannabis integrated naturally because of why? Like, how did we get to having the cannabis be a part of that fusion? Why? Because I would imagine you could do breath work alone, obviously, without the cannabis, and tantric breath work as well, by giving it some structure, like setting to the music or having the tonality, the verbalization, right? The expression, the sound. But why is cannabis infused? That part I'm still not certain of.
Yeah. So when I started doing serving the conscious cannabis ceremonies, I started noticing that it got very orgasmic for people. Many different people would say that they felt this full body energetic orgasm. I'm not talking about like a local physical orgasm at all. So I just kind of want to say that it's more, they call it a cosmic orgasm, where it just feels like you're vibrating from this. Some people compare it to ecstasy. and they've only had cannabis. Some people have even asked me if I put ecstasy in the weed. and so I started taking, note, and also realizing that it was very orgasmic for me too. And so it was surprising to hear so many people say it. And so at the time I wasn't aware, but then I got a download that I needed to study Kundalini and take some lessons with that. And then I started telling people I'm looking for Kundalini yoga. And then one of my friends was like, I teach Kundalini. I said, perfect. And so I hired her, and she was giving me private lessons, and I let her know, listen, I'm working with cannabis in this way where it's really connecting me unlike any other medicine has. And so I hope it's okay that in the session I'm going to smoke before and connect with Mary. And she said, of course. Well, we were in the session, and then she starts having me rotate my body in a circular undulation. And at that moment, I had my eyes closed. I start streaming tears because I had already been doing this on my own in my ceremonies. And so my body I was allowing the movements to flow through me rather than resisting it. And that's when I realized, holy shit, I was getting the information to seek Kundalini because my Kundalini started activating through the cannabis work and the breath work that I had been doing.
Innately, it just was...
Innately,
okay.
Exactly. I didn't know about it before. And that's when I knew that I wanted to devote a whole workshop ceremony specifically about Tantra and intimacy and educating about that energy and the chakras, our energy body. And so that's when I started practicing the two. And seeing a lot of miracles happen. And I guess a few months into it, I had a full-blown Kundalini awakening experience, which is a phenomenon that many people don't reach. And I had it just a few months after finding out what Kundalini even meant. Kundalini is a Shakti, it's a divine feminine energy. So Shakti is a Hindu goddess, and then Shiva is the divine masculine. And so they say that at the base of our spine are two serpents that are just sitting there dormant. Then you start to wake them up through doing these practices, clearing your channels and your energy portals. And so they start making their way up the chakras by slithering up if your chakras are open and balanced. If not, if they're blocked, then it won't make its way up. But then I was fortunate enough to be in a DMT Changa ceremony where it opened up for me, and many of my friends witnessed it in this ceremony, and I was on the floor convulsing in orgasmic bliss and ecstasy and having a full-blown, it felt like a goddess activation. I felt like I was connected to oneness, and it felt very feminine. It felt like a goddess. And so I don't know if it was me or if it was the creator, but it just, that experience right there was a confirmation that I was on the right path, and what was working for me and what I was teaching others, well, it was definitely working for me because I got the privilege of experiencing something so magnificent.
Can you recreate that Kundalini awakening moment for us in a little more detail, please? Because I think it's a fascinating story, it sounds like.
Yeah, so Changa is a smokable form of ayahuasca, they call it. It was discovered by an Australian who was trying to recreate ayahuasca, but in smokable form, using herbs and the ayahuasca vine, right? And it's a lot more gentler on the impact. Have you ever smoked DMT, crystallized? No. Okay, Bufo? Okay, so Changa, I would say, is just more, it's more smoother, and it's a different trip, but you will get into the DMT states, like instantly, where you can see full-blown visions and the sacred geometry, where it really just depends on the facilitator, the shaman or the medicine person. And so I did a ceremony with I have a fellow medicine woman who's a French Canadian with Micmac and Native American tribal roots. And so this was now my second experience with her. The first one was a whole other thing, but right now I want to talk about the Kundalini because you mentioned that. And so in that ceremony, we were in Tulum, in the middle of the jungle, and I had made the intention, holding up the Changa on my third eye, just asking like, am I on the right path right now? Like, I'm doing all these tours and sharing my work with Tantra and Cannabis, but it's not fully accepted in the mainstream. But do I want it? Do I want to be in that, play in that space? I was still trying to figure it out. And so, because it's challenging. People are afraid when they hear, well, some people just, they don't know what to think when they hear that word Tantra.
Yeah, right, sure.
Yeah, and so it's like, I feel like I'm in the business of educating people what it is, and that's usually what the conversations start with, like just teaching, teaching in order for them to, drop their guard and not see it as something demonic.
Or naughty,
or
at least.
Kinky, yeah.
But you were in the Changa ceremony. And what was the purpose of what was meant to be the purpose of this particular ceremony?
Healing.
Yeah. So you were there for
spiritual
healing.
Growth.
Okay, but the Kundalini awakening came as a surprise and not something that has been discussed or was a goal or anything to work towards with it.
No, that's not going to happen with everybody. Everybody's experience is completely different, and I think it does definitely make a difference based on what your intention is and what's going on in your life at that moment. And so in that experience, I had taken the 3 hits of the Changa, And then I fell back and I went into these vibrations where my whole body was just in this convulsing and these shakes.
My first thought is
involuntary.
I would be afraid that it's seizures. That's what I would be afraid of.
You or
Yeah, I could imagine somebody thinking that if their body started convulsing, my first thought would be a seizure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the people that I was with very much knew about these Kundalini activations that can cause the involuntary shaking.
Got it.
Even in, if you might have heard of TRE, trauma release and tension exercises, the whole point of that system is to get your body to release energy and wounds and trauma and tension and stress. And so that's what's happening
Got it.
at the same time. So your body's releasing all of that while you're experiencing orgasmic bliss and energy throughout your whole body. But it's not a local thing. It's a full body thing. And it felt like I was connected to God from all of my chakras out of my crown. And so that lasted about 15 minutes. And the energy was so powerful that it set off the alarm clocks, not alarm clocks, like a whole alarm system in the laundry room. And the beep didn't stop until I got out of the journey. I was coming out and fading awake. And then it stopped. And I was like, was that me? And the thing was like, beep, beep. People were like, wow, that is powerful. That's how intense the energy was when I was going through the orgasms. And so, yeah, it's unexplainable, but yeah.
I mean, is it anything that you've even heard peers like share anecdotes of similar experiences, awakening of that kind? Because I'm sure you've spoken to other people about Kundalini awakenings.
Oh, yeah. I have a lot of people that practice Kundalini, cat facilitators and people that work with that energy. And yeah, I mean, it's in that world, it's natural to go through that. But what I want to differentiate is the Kundalini activations and the Kundalini awakening.
Okay.
Most people use it interchangeably, and it's not.
Okay, got it.
Activations is when you're activating that sexual energy, that
Yes,
Shakti.
which can happen during sex.
It can happen during sex, and the person might feel and start doing the movements, but it's not the full-blown phenomenon. And so most people who do Kundalini yoga, I mean, the whole one of the big points of it is to achieve that state of oneness and enlightenment. It's a piece of enlightenment, and then a lot of people that do yoga, the Kundalini yoga, don't even know what that is, because I feel like maybe in the mainstream yoga communities, maybe they're not talking about it as much. I'm not sure. Because I've asked people, a lot of people don't know what it is.
Kundalini yoga.
The awakening.
Oh, okay.
Or they've never gotten there. So it is a rare thing, but I feel like more and more people are having these awakenings now more than ever.
You think because the language of how to consider it and relate to it is getting clearer over time due to education, and so that can be shared and
the
comprehended?
healing. I think it's the healing work that people are doing with exploring different modalities and working on ancestral trauma and removing the shame from sexuality and from doing the energy work, whether it's Reiki or working in other type of body work modalities. And so people are becoming clearer channels.
Tantra sounds like so much more than sexuality and sexual expression and sexual energy. But is it fair to say that that is what is most commonly thought of when a person with just passing knowledge would consider the term Tantra or Tantric? They immediately relate it to the sexual component?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in your work, with the breath work, it's more of the embodied nature of Tantra, right?
I feel like my specialty is awakening experiences.
Okay. I will say that the workshop that I had the pleasure of being able to attend I think that for some people, breath work alone can be intimidating, and potentially even anxiety inducing, right? And maybe that's just being told what to do, or like being in your body in a different way. But from my experience, there was some turbulence in getting going, committing to that sort of like metered, guided breath can feel like an unnatural exertion. But thankfully, in my experience, in that moment, there was a breakthrough to a cruising altitude that was felt much more present and much more embodied, much safer. And that was very rewarding. And it was very rewarding to be able to do that along with other people too. Now, I didn't utilize the cannabis in the workshop, but I still had, an experience that to me was facilitated by what you were doing, and a pleasurable experience, one that I would want to share with others that I care about too, right? And historically, my relationship with cannabis has been more of that paranoid, uncertain, anxious energy. And one of the things I've talked to you about is a consideration of a different relationship. But I don't know what it's going to take to get there myself with cannabis specifically. Everybody's so different physiologically. But you've gotten to a place where what do you think cannabis is here for? What do you think it presents to human beings for? Like, what's the point?
Well, being as though it's a feminine plant, I really do believe that it carries the codes and the essence of the divine feminine, of Mother Mary, Mary Jane, marijuana. It's in the name. And so in the Spanish, in the medicine community, we call it Santa Maria, Saint Mary.
Okay.
People call it that and have no idea why. And I've questioned them too. Do you know why it's called that?
Wasn't marijuana like a made-up name by the CIA or something?
I think it was with Mexicans from Tijuana that were smuggling the plant to California.
Okay.
There's a Brazilian tribe. Well, they're more of like a religious organization called Santo Daime.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've heard of them? Okay, yeah. And so they use the sacrament of ayahuasca and Santa Maria in their churches, in their practice. And the more I started like researching that, like, what do they know that we don't know? I have a friend that had attended one of these churches or in Brazil or sessions, and he said that there was this portal that they opened and he saw the spirits flying through and they were singing. They were, the songs or prayers. They were having a pretty intense, I don't know what the whole intention was. And so anyway, I wanted to see what they knew about Santa Maria. And so that's when I started looking on Google, and there was an image that I came across, many images of the Divine Mother covered in the cannabis plants. And that's when I first made the correlation, the association that, the Mother Mary was also part of this, this plant medicine that belongs to nature. And so with the whole suppression of the divine feminine that's been going on for eons, especially with, when you hear the prayer in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, where the is the mother, right? And so cannabis was prohibited, just like alcohol. But alcohol, like I get it because that's poison. But prohibiting a plant as if it were so evil. Now listen, I know that there's a lot of plants in the world that if you take too much, it could be fatal. Mm-hmm. For instance,
Datura.
Who?
Datura.
Datura. Okay. Yeah. Ibogaine, it's a root from Africa. You take too much, yes, you could have a heart attack. But you take just enough dosing for your body, your BMI, then it can completely wipe away depression, suicide ideation, any type of addiction. And so these are very miraculous cures. that these plants can do. And then with cannabis, it's a very powerful plant, and we need to be very responsible. If somebody takes too many edibles or too many brownies or cookies that are edibles and they go driving, that could be a hazard to so many, not just yourself, but others. So we really have to treat it with respect and with responsibility. But cannabis never came with an instruction manual on how to connect to it in order to access your wisdom. And I think that's one of the reasons why it was also prohibited, because it was consciousness expanding, and it also connects us into our intuition, something that they're, trying to get us away from our sovereignty. And thus, with the fluoride in the water and calcifying the pineal gland through the things in our food. And these practices help to give us greater access to that divine knowing.
You have a very specific relationship now that you've curated over time and practiced with cannabis specifically, and Mother Mary, as you refer to cannabis correctly. Mm-hmm. Do you see abuse of cannabis?
Yeah.
Where do you see that?
Well, I don't like to judge because I think there's a time and place for everything. With everything. And I think that a person can determine what is a good amount for them. What I like to teach with people, because this is what I practice on my own, is finding your own threshold.
Yeah.
So threshold with, let's say, with smoking cannabis, if I'm in a social setting or connecting in conversation with, for instance, you, then I would make sure not to smoke no more than 3 puffs, because then I'd get too high to the point where I'm no longer on this plane with you. And I'll forget my train of thought, because the short-term memory loss is a real thing. The cannabis helps to turn off the amygdala temporarily, so you forget about your worries and your stress. And I think that that's what people are tuning into as well when they want to decompress. The decompressing, the relaxing, but also to numb out the things that are pressing, or that, our anxieties, the things that we need to tend to or take care of or get healing with. And so I feel like it's almost like some people will use it as a crutch, and they'll feel nice and cradled, like a mother holding their child in their arms. And so I think people get too lost in that feeling, and they can get, all this creative ideas and think out of the box, and then discard it as, oh, I was just high. And it just came to me, but like it felt like a good idea at first, but no, I was just high, and writing it off to that. When in reality, those are divine downloads sometimes that can be used to fuel your goals and your dreams. But we're not tapping in because we're not closing our eyes and using presence and breathing, and even just closing down our physical eyes, so that way the senses can awaken more. And so it's a matter of tuning in, tapping in, tuning in, word, and exploring that realm. And so I feel like just people don't know how to get there. They just don't have the practices. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm trying to bridge.
And you've worked with couples before specifically, mm-hmm. who want to deepen their relationship and kind of expand on their intimacy base and their intimacy knowledge.
Right.
Can you describe a little bit about that work and what you're seeing like transformationally?
Yeah. So I get a lot of couples that are, for different reasons, either one of the partners doesn't have the same level of desire as the other one, or they're just not connected through emotionally as the other, and they don't know how to express their needs or desires, or there's some type of intimacy block, or there's abuse, whether it's sexual related or any other type of trauma that's getting in the way as well in the intimacy. And so it's really nice to have a third party where you can be led. Like if you're in a relationship and having a third party who's just guiding the two of you doing the practices, it really takes the load off of the one person being the one, okay, let's try this. Instead you're having someone lead you. And as adults, it's really nice to be led and just like let go and just play. Cause it always feels like play for me.
When you're in that environment.
Yeah. And so most people are running around stressed and they don't know how to turn off the active mind. And they come into these spaces, and Tantra is a mix of yoga, of meditation, breath work, and connection. And so they're experiencing these states, these extraordinary states of consciousness that they've never felt before, and an expansion of energy in their body. And it almost feels supernatural to them. And then they get to have this experience with their partner. And now you're connecting the spiritual intimacy with one another, and it's very soulful. And it gets people, most importantly, also to open up their hearts and speak from a place of compassion and forgiveness and positivity. And so, it gets people, it definitely puts them in a more open-minded place of where anything is possible with the relationship and growing together.
Are those cannabis infused experiences?
Yeah, but sometimes we don't even use it at all as well. The people that don't want to use it sometimes will even take CBD, and it will work just as well, or nothing at all. You
have some work that's forthcoming, and I don't know how much you can share about it today.
Yeah.
I'm not sure when exactly this podcast will come out in a number of weeks, but can you talk to kind of a little bit of what you're developing and what I know about and I'm hinting at now?
Yes. So we're coming out with, it's called Respark Box. So it's a package of a digital course of Tantra sexual mastery for couples. And so it's teaching couples how to get started on their tantric practices at home on their own. And so it's being accompanied with a sex track tincture and gummies that are libido enhancing. So it addresses the physiological things that can happen where, I took it and I had a wet dream. And so when you pair taking these tinctures and the gummies, which are, by the way, cordyceps and some mushroom strains like ashtawanga and horny goatweed. And anyway, so paired with the guidance of the tantric practices and then having your partner join along and watch it with you, the modules, then you can get to work right away. And it's wonderful because now you're bringing in consciousness into your sacred sexuality practice, your intimacy. And over time, you start to realize that it's making you hypersensitive now. It's connecting you back to your body. You're expanding your pleasure capacities. You're feeling things you never felt before. You're taking it way more slower. You're learning new ways of experiencing foreplay. Because at the end of the day, these practices, they can be very euphoric by slowing down and just having full presence with one another, spending full quality time, just making it very intentional, setting the date on or the blocking time on your calendar. Okay, we're going to do this intimacy ritual tonight. And having the anticipation of that, and then going into it together instead of the one person saying, I want to teach you something. No, it's like now you got to be led by me and then try it out. And what you'll find out is that the sex becomes that much more better. When I first found out about Tantra and then started practicing it with my partner and then having our lovemaking sessions, I was joking with my best friend at the time. I was like, I don't know how I'm ever going to go back to having vanilla sex with anybody else after this, because this is extraordinary. And so, yeah.
It's something that people really aren't continually educated in or helped with, really. Most people are sort of left to sort of fend for themselves and left to their own devices, and it's still highly stigmatized and tabooed, right? And I
Right.
feel like that's hopefully a part of what this podcast aspires to do, is continue to share information about things that are stigmatized and that can be heavily taboo, and at least provide information that people can use as a resource in going about learning for themselves.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your trip and coming by here and visiting. I was so happy to meet you at the conference. So fortunate to be able to attend the workshop, and I look forward to continuing to explore what you're doing and share what you're doing. And for people who do want to learn more about your practice, the best ways to get in touch would be
hightantra.com. Look at me up on Instagram at Zipporah.thehighpriestess, and hightantra@gmail.com.
excellent. We'll continue to share stuff as it develops. Zipporah, thank you so much.
Thank you too.